Hi, this is Dee Wallace, and you're listening to the Then Is Now podcast.
Rise and shine, my sinners. When Father Evil starts his day, he gets a little deadly. Deadly Grounds coffee has the richest, smoothest flavor you'll find anywhere. It's sinfully delicious. Once you go deadly, you never go back. Order yours at getdeadly.com. Coffee's so good, it's scary.
Warning, warning!
Today's episode contains spoilers. So if you have not seen the movie or TV show that we are talking about, we highly recommend that you watch it first, then listen to this episode. Thank you.
Welcome to 13 Days of Hallowtober.
Hello and welcome to this special episode of Then Is Now podcast. I am your host, Rigor, and I am joined by my son/frequent guest co-host, Spency Domepiece. Glad to have you back, Spency. It's been a while.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Okay, so today is the first episode of our yearly event called 13 Days of Hallowtober. Every October for the last 13 days, we put out an episode a day discussing horror movies that fall into whatever theme we've chosen. Last year in 2020, the theme was scariest movies, and with the assistance of my group of rotating co-hosts, we discussed what are widely regarded as the scariest movies of all time. Now this year, our theme is zombie movies. Now, they don't have to be scary, they can be funny, but ever since George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, the granddaddy of the modern zombie film, zombie movies have been wide and varied, from absolutely terrifying to knee-slappingly funny. Spency and I were toying with ideas about the theme for 2021's 13 Days of Hallowtober, and initially, I think we were contemplating doing a movie series like Saw or Conjuring, right?
Yeah, we were gonna start with franchises like The Conjuring, like The Omen, and the Saw movies and stuff like that.
Like Friday the 13th, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's better to just do some of these bigger overarching categories and maybe do franchises at a different time.
Yeah, I feel that, like, a franchise is just too much viewing, especially if one of the hosts hasn't seen all of the movies. It's like, especially like Friday the 13th. You'd have to talk to someone who really knows all those movies.
Or you could just do the whole franchise for that year of Hallowtober.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, we could do that, yeah. So a lot of ideas, but for 2021 we are doing zombies. So one thing I do want to mention is that on this particular series of episodes, just like last year, we're not going to do the usual deep dive. It takes us like hour and a half, 2 hours into the films that we usually do on a single episode of Then Is Now, since we have so many episodes to crank out in a short amount of time. So today, Spency and I are going to just, keep it brief. When I say brief, it's probably going to be like 40 minutes like last year. But we are going to discuss one that is terrifying but very different from most other zombie movies. It's called World War Z from 2013. So sit back and get ready for a fun discussion. Class is in session. Retired UN investigator Jerry Lane, played by Brad Pitt, and his family are sitting in what appears to be a typical Philadelphia traffic jam when helicopters begin to circle ominously overhead and an explosion throws the city into a panic. In the blink of an eye, the streets are consumed by chaos. When Jerry learns that the catalyst for the turmoil is a highly contagious virus that transforms those who contact it into rampaging maniacs and that legions of the infected are growing on all continents, he agrees to join his former colleagues in discovering the source of the rampant plague so that his wife and 2 daughters will be guaranteed safety aboard a UN fleet in the Atlantic Ocean. Upon tracing a crucial email to a U.S. military base in South Korea, Jerry learns that the infection has spread more rapidly than anyone realizes. Although a subsequent trip to Jerusalem, where the government has constructed a massive wall to keep the public safe, initially offers hope that the growing horde can be kept at bay, an unexpected breach sends Jerry back into the sky in search of Patient Zero. Just when Jerry thinks he's traced the origins of the virus, however, the unthinkable happens. Subsequently stranded in Cardiff with a fearless Israeli soldier, Jerry quickly makes his way to a World Health Organization outpost where the few remaining scientists have hit a dead end in their search for a cure. But the struggle is far from over, and after recalling an unusual scene witnessed in Jerusalem, Jerry prepares to make a leap of faith that could prevent the downfall of humanity. So, Spency, first impressions.
I really enjoyed it. It was a very different zombie movie than what I've seen. I've heard it described as bloodless, which it very much was, but it still had the enjoyable factors of some of those intimate zombie moments that characters have, but it also had very much a disaster movie feel. It felt a lot more closer to this, overarching thing like the San Andreas fault line, like that movie San Andreas that came out a little while ago, or Geostorm, or Greenland, and all those other big disaster movies.
The Poseidon Adventure, the Towering Inferno. Yeah, I agree, but also, and one of the things the writers and the director talked about, and we'll get into that in a little bit, was that they very much wanted it to be a political thriller, and I definitely got that vibe from this movie.
Yeah, having the main character be an unwilling protagonist in the UN investigation of the whole thing, I think really works.
Yeah.
It definitely kind of adds a whole lot of, reasons for the character to be at the center of attention the way he is. And because it starts off with the family, it becomes this, we actually kind of care about these people. We don't necessarily need to know their whole life story to care, but we like them because they seem like a nice, ordinary family who's hit with this amazing, extraordinary tragedy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm pretty sure I saw this first at the drive-in. You were there, right? But I was watching it on a different screen.
Yeah, I didn't watch it up until just when we most recently watched it for the first time.
Right.
But I've seen other things around it. They came out with a World War Z game that very much simulated some of the stuff that went on, although it was a bit more violent than the movie was.
A video game?
Yeah.
Nice.
And a lot of the details had to do with, it was very horde-based, very much, just pelting bullets into the horde, which is different from most other zombie movies. Because usually the combat in them, when it comes to things like Dead Island or Dying Light, combat is very intimate, very melee weapon based, whereas in this it's a third person shooter where you're just running around and trying to stop the hordes as best you can.
Right. Yeah, I definitely enjoyed this film. I thought it was fast paced and terrifying. I didn't mind that the CGI effects were a little obvious or not that great, but for some reason, I don't know, at least for me, it kind of worked.
I didn't notice at all what was CGI and what wasn't, because it was so different. Like I keep saying, a lot of the zombie encounters in most movies is, if it's horde-based, it's one of those you don't want to get close to them. They're usually slow for the most part. Sometimes they can be faster, but this was like you described it when we were watching the movie as like water, like a tidal wave of bodies just coming at everybody, and it was terrifying. It's a lot scarier than seeing one zombie in the distance is intimidating because you don't want to get attacked or infected, but seeing a horde of them sprinting and this movie did not have that undead feel. It felt like they were more brain dead because it didn't have anything to do with corpses rising from the grave.
Right.
It had everything to do with people becoming infected and becoming just rabid monsters.
Yeah. I still think they were undead because a lot of the scientists were saying that they were undead. But yeah, you're absolutely right. This is different. It's taken the Romero rules, but changed it a little bit because they're not rising out of the grave. They're only turned when infected by a bite.
And I think that adds to the factor of a bite is definitely a death sentence because people have been seen to turn within seconds and some within minutes. And B, it also kind of works because if you're a dead body, you're probably not going to be very much running, but if you're an infected person who's still alive, it kind of makes sense that they slam their heads on windows and windshields and go right through. It's like, if you're really, really drunk and you're just using your entire bodily force to do something, that's kind of how it would go.
Yeah.
Which is much more intimidating, especially when they're running over each other to climb the walls and just get in there.
They're like ants. That's what I said that to you when we were watching it.
Yeah.
They're like, you ever watch ants piling up on something and getting higher and higher as they crawl on top of each other? It's for a PG-13, relatively bloodless zombie movie, this was freaking frightening. I jumped many times, and I've seen it before.
Yeah, there were a few really good jump scare moments, which I did not feel very cheated by at all. Sometimes they can just be
Right.
like, wow, I could have seen that one coming.
Right.
That was kind of weak. But a lot of them, they happen so far and few in between that you're not really expecting them.
Right. And they set it up well. You're not prepared for it. A lot of times, the person walking through the quiet, dark room, there's a window and a door. Someone's going to jump out or a cat's going to come through the window. But, in this, all of a sudden the character turns around and there's a zombie right up their ass. It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, yeah. It's not very expected. And I think that really works in the movie's favor. They didn't have any, like, gore scenes of people getting ripped apart. It was violent. I mean, people were getting run over by hordes.
Right.
But you didn't witness anybody's guts get spewed out. You didn't witness any blood spurting out everywhere. They even had moments where some of the one-off zombies did get killed, but it was completely off-screen death.
Right.
And I feel like that kind of works in the favor of it being closer to a disaster movie than it being just another, gore-fest zombie movie.
Oh, man, you just gave me a great idea. Wouldn't it be cool if there was a disaster movie, but it was like totally blood and guts? Like, really nasty rated R.
Isn't that what the Final Destination franchise is?
Yeah, I suppose. It's not really a disaster movie, but yeah, that's funny. So let's get into our cast and crew here. First, we've got the director. His name's Mark Forster. Now, he's done Monsters Ball, the James Bond film Quantum of Solace, and Christopher Robin, among many others. And I thought he did a great job. I thought the pacing was great. He did describe, as we kind of mentioned a little bit before, that this movie, World War Z, he described it as reminiscent of 1970s conspiracy thrillers like All the President's Men, which, like I said, I definitely got that vibe here. But I thought he had a great handle on the movie. Really, from scene to scene, it was great.
Yeah, it definitely didn't feel like any punches were pulled, because a lot of the people that we saw that didn't get attacked, had reasons for not being attacked. Like, most people were on the UN fleet,
Right.
Which makes perfect sense. They're not. If
Right.
there's nobody infected on there, you're not going to get infected. Whereas almost every other place that seemed safe was certainly unsafe for one reason or another, and the way it kind of went forward really worked, because there were so many characters that we started to like enjoy and things like that, and then just tragedy strikes.
Right.
Some people roll their fumbles, and it just gets worse.
A little role-playing reference there for you. So next up, we have our writers. Now, this was a screenplay by a guy's named Matthew Michael Carnahan, Drew Goddard, and Damon Lindelof, who was famous for producing Lost, among many other things, from a story by Carnahan and J. Michael Straczynski, which is also, the story they did is based on the 2006 novel of the same name by Max Brooks. Now, J. Michael Straczynski, of course, is the creative force behind the TV series Babylon 5. He wrote pretty much all 5 years, I think, except for one script. And he's a famous comic book author as well. And you could definitely see his hand in this, and just the logic, how everything flows very well logically. But when I was looking at this, at the writers, I was getting concerned, because usually when you've got a lot of writers on a movie, it usually means the movie's going to suck, because people keep changing things and you have too many hands in it. But I don't think that was the case here. I thought this movie worked very well from a writing standpoint as well.
Yeah, I felt like every character was consistent with who they were and what they wanted, and I really enjoyed Brad Pitt's Jerry as this unwilling protagonist, and then things just get worse, and he has to step up and be the man to do everything that needs to happen, because he's the only one with the skills to do it.
Right.
I definitely felt like the pacing of the movie worked, because there were these moments of intimate zombies, moments of horde zombies, and then moments of like one-off or none that were just trying to continue the plot. And it also didn't feel like too cheesy or too Deus Ex Machina.
Right.
Because a lot of zombie films can be like, oh, well, now that we've survived, we've hit the military, we're going to be fine.
Right.
It definitely wasn't like that. It very much felt like, when, March of 2020, when within 5 days, the world shut down.
Oh, yeah. There was a lot that reminded me of the pandemic. In fact, they even mentioned the Spanish flu of 2018 and how that pandemic the Spanish flu of 1918, I misspoke, and how what was going on in the film reminded them of that. And I just thought that was really odd, because everyone's been saying how this pandemic that we're in has, reminded them of the Spanish flu.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's one of the biggest things to do with disease.
Yeah.
Because, obviously most of the zombies that has to do with things, it can come from anywhere. It can come from this, corpses or people die and then come back, or they've got a supernatural element like Evil Dead per se.
Right.
But it's really definitely feel logical because Brad Pitt's searching after patient zero, right? For every disease, you need to search for patient zero.
Right.
And it's just really, really interesting how everything is going, kind of how everything goes and how he meets everybody. And it doesn't feel like also he goes somewhere and everybody starts to die around him. It felt like he goes somewhere just at the time things are starting to shit to hit the fan at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of the deal.
And speaking of Brad Pitt, he was, of course, our lead actor as the character Jerry Lane. He's Jerry Lane, the character, is a former UN field agent who's called back into duty to investigate a zombie pandemic to protect his wife and children, as we've established. What can we say about Brad Pitt? He's just a Hollywood legend. He was in such things as Interview with the Vampire, 12 Monkeys, Ocean's 11, Inglourious Bastards, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, just to name a scant few of the 84 films he's been in.
This is the first time I've seen Brad Pitt in something I knew it was Brad Pitt.
Right, because you've seen Inglourious Bastards before, but
yes,
you were younger.
But I was a lot younger, A, and B, I just don't know him that much as an actor, like in the sense of what he's done. I don't this is his most famous role in my head,
right?
Because I really just don't see him in any other things. But I really enjoyed him, and he thought he did a great job.
Oh yeah,
with this movie,
I thought he was awesome in this, and again, you could totally relate to him, to his character, like you said before, in terms of your family's in danger. What do you do? Like the whole first third, maybe a little bit less of the movie was him and the family trying to escape, and you didn't know really where it was going to go. How are they going to get out of this? And of course, they end up meeting well, we'll get into the plot points in a little bit. I just want to talk more about the cast here. We've got Muriel Enos, who played Karen Lane, who is Jerry's wife, and she was in The Gangster Squad and the TV series Good Omens, which is based on the novel by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. I felt she did a solid job here, although her character doesn't have a whole heck of a lot to do after the first third of the film. She's more like sitting around waiting, worrying for him.
Because at that point, though, she's kind of like, since she's the matriarch of the family, and it's him, her, and then the two daughters, and he's the only one with the skills to go in and solve this crisis.
A particular set of skills.
Exactly. So I didn't feel like her role was wasted. I felt like it made sense that once the family was safe, Brad Pitt's character, Jerry, was able to go off in a relatively stable mindset of my family is safe, let's go save the world.
Right. So, and that was interesting how they get him to do that. So moving on here, we've got Daniela Cortez, who played Segan, an IDF soldier, Israeli Defense Force soldier, who was only identified by that name, and it's Hebrew for lieutenant.
Oh.
Which I thought was interesting. And she's the one, she gets her hand cut off after being bitten to prevent the spread of the virus, which that's something we've seen before in George Romero's Day of the Dead, where a dude gets bitten on the arm and they have to cut it off to prevent him from turning.
Yeah, that definitely felt like it was... I wouldn't call it a trope, because the way it kind of came out was Brad Pitt, at the end of the day, his whole character had to experiment to test the limits of this thing.
Right.
So when she got bit on the hand or the finger or something, and he slices her hand off, there's this really neat thing that happens. Every time he thinks somebody's infected, he counts, 1 1,000, 2 1,000, because at the very beginning, he saw somebody get infected with about 12 seconds worth of being bitten and then becoming a full infected. And I thought that was a very genius idea for a smart person to do, of how do we test the limits of this virus? Well, when something happens, you have to experiment a little bit and test your theory of, I don't know what's going to happen.
Right. And what was even more genius about the way he figures it out, that it takes 12 seconds to turn, is the family's running, the girl drops her stuffed animal or whatever, and he grabs it, and the thing is like, it's got some kind of recorder in it or a voice, box in it, and it starts counting up to 12 in this, childlike or, geared towards children kind of voice. And so all the sound in the movie kind of goes very, very low, and the loudest thing you hear is this thing counting as he's seeing this person who's on the ground writhing and stuff, and then basically 12 seconds passes, this toy counts, and that's, I think, what helped it stick in the character's head.
What is that, Jerry? What is that?
I don't know. Get to the RV.
Here comes the number 12 train. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Trains in the station.
Yeah, exactly. It didn't feel like anything was too planted or too Deus Ex Machina. It just, it just happened to be that, and he took that and really used it to his advantage, which kind of worked. And there's a point where he gets some blood in his mouth from an encounter with a zombie, and he says that and then runs towards the edge of the building they're on,
Right.
because he doesn't want to turn and attack his family. So he does the whole count thing, and when he doesn't turn, he thinks he's probably safe.
Right. And it was funny too, because when the blood got into his mouth, I wondered about that.
Yeah, I guess that just whatever the mechanics of the disease in this fictional universe, but I didn't feel like it was one of those you could have pointed it out and it was a mistake in the movie.
Right.
It felt like it was intentional, which means okay, that makes
Right.
it much more enjoyable to watch this rather than looking at it and saying, "Well, wait, what if this happened?" and they just don't address it at all. It felt
Right,
like the writers definitely thought this whole thing through and thought of the possible questions that people could come up with.
Yeah.
And addressed it in a matter of 20 seconds.
And you know what that made me think, though? I wondered, is he immune? They never really touched on the fact that were there any people on the Earth that had gotten bit and didn't change?
There was this one-off line that I caught that one of the main doctors towards the first half of the movie said about 5% get bit and don't turn.
Oh, you're right.
About 5%, and that definitely felt like a ballpark estimate and possibly not even really backed up by facts and just the
Right.
possible anecdotal evidence, and mistakes could have been very made. So it was very much a, take this with a whole lot of salt, but it was one of those things that you don't know if that's going to happen. And there's the whole detail at the end of the movie about how they start dealing with the zombie apocalypse and the disease mechanics behind it.
Right.
Is very, very interesting and fun, and I thought was very creative, and I wasn't really ready for it, and it didn't feel like any of those details were missed, because it felt like it was set up very well, and it felt like it was very much continuity based.
Yeah.
From the beginning to the end, this mechanic was in place. We just had to figure it out in time.
Right.
And I think that's a sign of good writing.
Oh, exactly. And now I just want to point out to the listeners that I don't think you and I both have started the novel World War Z at certain points, but we never actually really read it.
Yeah, I remember the novel being from the perspective of one of the doctors trying to find patient zero, and it started as like this plague in Africa, I think.
Yeah.
And he had met this person and kind of was this almost like a memoir of the war, rather than it being kind of just this one character's adventure in a novel form.
Right.
Like the movie is. So I thought that was really interesting. It was almost like two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, that's true. I was just going to say I didn't want to really comment on the differences because I don't know the difference.
Yeah, I didn't read it, but I remember the beginning, and if depending on if any of the changes, I don't know how far they differed from the source material, but it seems like it very well could be the same event, just seen differently.
Right,
which
exactly.
is, once again, I think a sign of great writing.
Oh, yeah.
And a great respect to the source material.
Right. Hi, this is Rigor, host of Then Is Now podcast and The East Meets the West. I just wanted to say thank you to all of our Patreon subscribers. We appreciate your support as we grow the audience for our shows. You could find our links to our Patreon page as well as our TeePublic page at havenpodcasts.com. With Patreon, you'll get a lot of exclusive stuff, including our monthly pop culture newsletter, cool gifts, discounts for TeePublic, and our special exclusive show, Then Is Now Filmmakers series, in which we interview directors, producers, writers, composers, special effects guys, basically anybody who works behind the scenes in film and television, and get their insights into the process of creating films and TV shows. Also at our TeePublic page, you'll find cool merch that you can get or even give to others as gifts. You can find those links at our website, or you can go directly to tpublic.com/stores/havenpodcasts and patreon.com/thenisnowpodcast. Enjoy! Two other actors I just wanted to make sure I brought up on this show. One was David Morse, and he played the ex-CIA officer who was imprisoned for selling weapons to assist North Korea's offensive on the zombies, which was a cool scene because he basically describes that the government ripped out the teeth of the entire population, thereby stopping the spread of the virus.
Yeah, I mean, that's a solution.
Yeah. He is known for being General Hummel's assistant in the great action film The Rock. Remember him?
Yeah.
And he's been in tons of stuff, man. He's been in The Green Mile, Contact, 12 Monkeys. He's one of those character actors that you've seen his face 1,000 times.
I don't really register him, but I can imagine that I've seen him in things.
Well, you don't pay attention to character actors too, I think.
It's hard when I don't A, I don't know them, B, I don't know them from a lot of movies.
That's true.
Obviously,
yeah.
like they're like Peter Capaldi makes an appearance as.
Oh yeah, so that he was next on my list. Yeah.
I was going to mention him as a Who doctor, and as soon as I saw his face, I called it out. I'm like, is that Peter Capaldi? And we only saw it for a second, and then he finally starts talking, and I'm like, that very well might be Peter Capaldi.
Yes, and I was going to bring him up. It's actually a huge bit of irony here. Peter Capaldi, who, as Spency said, was one of the Who doctors. WHO obviously stands for World Health Organization and is used in this movie that way, but he is most notable for playing the 12th Doctor on the long-running British sci-fi series Doctor Who, in which he did after this movie. I think it was a couple years after this movie came out, and I just thought it was ironic that he played Doctor Who, and he's listed here as Who Doctor, and I'm sure that irony is not lost on him in real life.
I wonder how many people ask him about that.
Yeah. Did you know going in that you were going to be Doctor Who? But, and I liked this character. It was a small role, but I thought it was very pivotal in the story, or very pivotal to the story, I should say, in terms of helping Brad Pitt to achieve one of his goals.
Yeah, and it didn't feel like they were, some paranoid scientist who saw this whole thing coming. They're just, epidemiologists who are boxed in like everybody else, and they end up saving a couple characters' lives because they're doctors,
right?
And it very much felt like they were the perfect kind of people to be where they needed to be.
Yeah.
And once again, like, nothing felt out of place in this movie, which I really enjoyed. My favorite parts of the movie were just watching the hordes run over people.
Yeah.
And the aerial shots of some of these hordes, first of all, must have been extremely fun to film.
Oh, yeah.
Second of all, were absolutely horrifying from just seeing how this would affect the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrifying.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
It was very scary. It grossed over $540 million against a supposed production budget of $190 million, making it basically the highest-grossing zombie film of all time. And as we talked off mic,
I think it's mostly to do with the fact that it's PG-13,
right?
And you can take your your tween, your young teen to come and see a disaster movie because is it violent? Absolutely, but at the end of the day, the violence is akin to any action movie, any Fast and Furious movie would have more violence than this one, and this one is very, very, very good about not being like graphic in that sense. I keep saying it, bloodless zombie movie. I'd never seen anything like that before.
Oh yeah,
so I thought pulled it off. I thought the horde view of things was very, very fun and very, very good. But they didn't lose the intimacy that came with seeing one of them up close. The makeup and the special effects when it came to actually having the zombies up close was super, super awesome. I thought, props to that department, A, and B, for all the extras acting as the zombies. This was great.
One thing I really liked about this movie too was the fact that they used the word zombie in there, even though like one of the soldiers at one point calls them Zeeks instead of zombies. A lot of times when they're referred to as zombies in films, it comes across as really cheesy, but it just somehow worked in this.
They addressed that though with this. They addressed that, like, wait, an email went out saying the word zombie and the world panicked. And it's like, are they really undead? Is it, really, what is this? And they start really questioning it. It sounds really corny to the doctors, even as soon as they first heard it, until there becomes some real up close interactions with them, and it's just the only word that applies.
Right, exactly.
Especially because the way the governments of certain countries found out about it in their communications, zombie was more than just this English word that kind of became popularized for the outbreak. It was used by India to describe what this thing could be, and it just kind of took off from there. And I felt like it worked, and because they addressed it as sounding so corny and silly for at least at the point in the movie they were at, I felt like it really worked. And plus, it kind of gives it the title of World War Z.
Right. Yeah.
I think that kind of works. I really think that works.
Well, I just wanted to touch back on the budget for a brief second here. I read conflicting things. Now, I've read, of course, the 190 million was the budget. I also read it was 125 million, and then somewhere else it said it was upwards of 296 million. So I don't know what the actual budget of this film was. It's hard to say, but they did say a sequel was announced shortly after the film's release. But in February of 2019, it was canceled, reportedly due to budget issues. So I don't know if I don't know what the story is there.
I mean, yeah, I suppose they probably couldn't figure out how much money to spend on it for some reason or another.
Right, exactly. It's funny, too, when we're talking about the author, Max Brooks, who wrote the book, he basically said he had zero control on the film, but he really liked having Brad Pitt, and he expressed, of course, approval for Straczynski as a screenwriter. Brooks is quoted as saying, "I can't give it away, but Straczynski found a way to tie it all together. The last draft I read was amazing." So.
All right, then. So we can only assume that's the draft we saw on screen.
Yeah.
Which I'm gonna keep saying it again. Very different zombie movie.
I think
what
Damon.
I was ready for.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think Damon Lindelof did do a somewhat of a rewrite of the ending, but yeah, overall it was just a solid script.
Yeah, and it didn't feel like it was this one complete circle of we see the beginning of the disaster, we see the end of the disaster. All we saw were the critical moments of how we were going to deal with this thing, which really I felt like it kind of worked. All we got to see was really Brad Pitt's story of him trying to protect his family and then eventually being drafted to save the world.
Right. And I wanted to get into that a little bit, but I wanted to say, too, that I really liked his character, Brad Pitt. He wasn't an Indiana Jones or a James Bond. He was sort of just this regular dude that had skills because he had been an investigator for the UN. But he rarely used a gun. He only used a gun a little bit in the movie, and he more relied on his wits, even, not only to get out of situations, but in confronting the zombies as well.
And in keeping him and some of his compatriots just sane, because when he's trying to escort one of the doctors, he talks about, just focus on their boots and their words. Just listen to them and they'll keep you safe.
Yeah.
As in trust the professional soldiers and the elite, Navy SEALs, I think, that were going with them.
Right.
And that's kind of just one of those small details that you just can only see from a character with experience.
Right.
And experiencing things that they mentioned some political crises that he had been, an investigator for previously, which I didn't register really personally because I was a little kid when those things happened. Something in 2007 and 2003. But I still felt like it kind of worked, and you got the sense that he just did not want to go around, killing and get back into the fight. He just wanted to get this job done and find out the information he needed to get out.
And that's the thing too. We've been alluding to is first of all, by the way, folks, as you may already know, there's a spoiler disclaimer at the beginning of the show, so we may end up spoiling the shit out of this. So make sure you go watch the film. We'll try not to spoil.
Yeah,
too much.
I'm gonna try not to spoil the actual big thing that goes on, the climax of the film.
Right. Yeah. All right. We won't.
I don't want to spoil that because I think it's very, very unique and not something I really see in zombie movies.
Right.
Personally,
that's true.
I've seen a few of them, and at the end of the day, it becomes this how can we get out of this situation to safety? Whereas at the end of the day, Brad Pitt's family got to safety in the first third of the movie.
Right.
So it then became this, we have to get more information and deal with the crisis at hand.
And that's the thing, too, now. So they get onto the aircraft carrier, and they're basically trying to draft him into service to help, solve this crisis. And he says, no, I'm done with that life. I've retired. And they're like, okay, well, you and your family can get off then. And it's at that point that he's like, okay, fine, I'll do it, just as long as the wife and kid are safe. But then later on, they think he's dead, and they boot the wife and the kids off the boat.
Yeah, it was one of those things that felt like it was inevitable.
I was irritated by that. I was pissed off. I'm like, what the fuck? It's the last vestiges of humanity, and you're gonna throw them to the wolves, so to speak.
Yeah, you can have your opinions on it. At the end of the day, that's kind of part of the political thriller aspect of this movie. Of how are they dealing with civilians?
Right.
There's a whole big thing about essential personnel versus non-essential personnel.
Yeah.
And who's going to get resources like food and water, especially on a boat.
Right. Exactly.
So
I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, I like the fact too that he was a detective chasing the clues around the world. It was almost like a role-playing game in the sense that, of what he was doing and how he, where he had to go, find this clue, it leads you here, then, oh, that didn't work out, but wait, I got another clue, you go to Israel.
Yeah, and then there was moments where, there's there isn't a crisis of zombies at hand, so he does some, mental puzzle solving.
Right.
Which I thought was great, and I really I didn't fully understand what he was trying to solve, and I didn't feel like, the movie was keeping me out of the loop. I felt like he was figuring something out that if I didn't get it now was going to be spelled out in a second.
Right.
Which it was.
Yeah.
And I thought it felt perfectly fine, especially when then you go back and rewatch it. I imagine I'll be seeing things like, oh wow, look at that one and look at that. Like that has to do with this later thing that they establish in the movie.
Yeah.
Kind of deal.
And they did a pretty good job at the beginning with like when him and the family are on the run, their car gets wrecked. They managed to steal this kind of little, it wasn't a Winnebago, but it wasn't a van either. It was sort of like a small kind of a camper.
Yeah.
And they managed to get to a pharmacy because the daughter's having an asthma attack.
Yes.
And they needed to inhale the albuterol, whatever. And, I liked that. I liked that whole scene where the people were looting the place. And it gets a little horrific at one point, but they managed to keep it PG-13, but still drive the point home that scares the shit out of you. I don't want to say what happens there, but
yeah, it was one of those things where it got to a point where you saw a cop, and of course there was a rifle in Brad Pitt's hand, and he's like, "Oh no, I was defending my family when I had to discharge the rifle," and the cop just walks right by him. It like barely acknowledges his existence and goes for the supplies that he needs.
Right.
That's when you know society has really gone downhill.
Oh yeah, and the first thing he goes for, the one thing he goes for, is like baby food and diapers and all that.
Yeah,
so that was kind of cool.
Makes you scared for him and his family now.
Right. And it reminded me of, in the real world here, back at the beginning of 2020, when, people were buying up toilet paper in by the ton,
Yeah.
Which, it was funny. All right, this is a little off topic here, but speaking of that, it just reminded me, a few months, I guess I'm going to say like December of 2019, I had seen an article, because we knew COVID was out there. We knew something was happening with this COVID thing, but we really didn't take it seriously. And there was an article about, in Florida, how there was a huge run on toilet paper, like BJ's, which has shit tons of toilet paper, were running out. And our friend Mike lives out in Florida, and I messaged him and I said, "Dude, are you okay? What's going on?" And he had no idea. He hadn't even heard of it. So I said to my wife, I think we really need to start buying up some toilet paper. And she's poo-pooed the whole idea. She's like, "Oh no." And I'm telling you, man, by March, she was like, "You know what? You were right. We should have bought toilet paper."
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, there is a little bit of a difference.
We were okay.
There's a difference between, a disease that is creating killers versus a disease that is just doing the killing.
Yeah.
There is a fine line of, for the most part, I wasn't too worried about the survival of most people unless they had the disease.
Right, but what was concerning me was that the fact that we would start to run out of supplies and people would start to get desperate. And you would have that kind of looting, not just of stores, but then of people's houses. And that's what that scene struck a chord with me about.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those like disaster moments of everybody fending for themselves. And I think that's a different brand of horror than seeing a monster and running from it.
Right. Exactly.
That's a very different, it was a very, very personal thing because we saw zombies at the beginning. We saw a couple people turn, absolutely, and some people get ran over by a horde, but then there's a good chunk of the movie that's just this familial drama of trying to avoid the bloodthirsty killers and then avoid the people.
Right. Yeah,
Very,
exactly.
very scary. Very, very, character centric. And I don't think that's a bad thing for a movie like this.
Oh yeah, no, it was. I think that worked to its strength.
I'm not a fan of disaster movies. I've always found that disaster movies can be really boring, especially when the ending is relatively black and white of the main character dies or the main character doesn't. There isn't a whole lot of safety at hand. So I really am not a fan of disaster movies for the most part, but this one
Yeah,
definitely felt really, really good in the sense of like, there might be a cure, there might be a vaccine, there might be camouflage, there might be a way to fight them that's beyond using bullets.
yeah,
It was really interesting because the outcome of this is very up in the air.
Yeah.
Especially because the source is just as up in the air.
Oh, exactly, exactly. Now, the music in this movie was made by a guy named Marco Beltrami, and you've seen his name on so many different movies and TV shows. I'm just going to mention some of the things that he did, which would be Live Free or Die Hard, Blade 2, Max Payne, Jonah Hex, and he even did the prequel film to John Carpenter's The Thing in 2011, which was oddly enough also called The Thing. And I felt the music really punched it up in the right places, but it definitely slowed down when things were in the quiet parts without manipulating the audience. You know, sometimes it can be like, oh, this is the scene where I'm supposed to cry, or oh, this is the scene where I'm supposed to laugh. And I thought the music was way more subtle, and I didn't feel like it was using me.
Yeah, exactly. And there was a big point I noticed where the music was either really faded out or all but gone when we were hearing some of the smaller hordes and the one-off zombies do their little like groans.
Yeah.
That was a big thing of like actually trying to get us into the horror of what was happening to these now dead people.
Yeah.
I felt like that kind of worked, when the family is running and driving and there's a horde and it becomes this massive thing, the music kicks up and it does really, really great job of keeping the tension high.
Yeah.
But then when they didn't need to have music, instead of having ominous music in the background, they just let the sound speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Which I think is a big deal in movies.
Oh, absolutely.
When you let the strength of the scene itself stand.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. I noticed that. I was like, oh wow, that makes it ominously creepier. It's almost like the sound guy got bit.
Right.
Now he's out of there.
Like in Spaceballs.
Yeah, exactly. When they kill one of the crew members.
Right. But yeah, the like you mentioned, the guttural noise that these zombies make was just like, it was this, I don't know if I can do it or not.
Oh God.
Like it was right from the back of the throat, like maybe their throats closed up or something, or dried up.
It felt like they were predators, but they didn't have any plans.
Right.
That's really what it felt like. Like they were just natural animalistic predators that were just gonna chase and eat, and that's what they were gonna do. And it almost didn't even feel like their noises were intentional.
Right.
Just like they just lost most bodily function except the baseline of, chase after a healthy host and essentially spread the disease.
Right.
I don't know if anybody has watched Fringe. There was an episode
yeah.
of Fringe where they had this disease that infected this building, and it would change people's behaviors of, instead of walking into a building and trying to infect people and having the spores sprout everywhere, it became this pushing people to want to get out,
right.
to increasing their desire to get out of the building and into the fresh air, something like that. And I felt like that was definitely what was going on, because they addressed that later in the film of their whole goal is to just spread and not just eat people.
Right.
Because not too many people got ripped apart. It was one of those, you got bit, you are now infected, you are no longer a target for the horde.
So, Spence, final thoughts on World War Z, and would you recommend this to people your age?
I enjoyed it as a disaster movie and as a zombie movie. It was one of the most unique I've ever seen, given all of the finer details that came on. I thought Brad Pitt did an excellent job as the main lead and as a dad and as the kind of, almost like an action hero and a detective at the same time. I felt like the effects of the movie did perfectly fine. I didn't notice any problems. In fact, it was one of the cooler effects I've seen in a movie, where it's just these hordes of people slamming into each other that look like ants or water or like a tidal wave of bodies. It's pretty scary. So I don't think that people my age, who are at the end of the day, people my age are spoiled with special effects.
Yeah.
And it happens to me too. I don't really want to sit through a movie from the 60s and the effects are harder to look at just because of the quality. So it happens to me too. But I think this movie does a really good job of what it's trying to do. And to walk into it expecting a zombie disaster movie is exactly what you get.
Exactly. I loved it. I had forgotten how engaging it was. I've seen it a few times over the years and since the theater, and it definitely has that old school monster movie feel. I really felt. I thought the cast was solid. It literally the movie grabs you from the beginning and doesn't let you friggin' go until the end. Man, there was so many scenes where I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the scene was done, and then I would take a breath and be like, oh my god.
Yeah, I've played enough horror games to find that movies are less engaging, which sometimes that means some scares don't get me nearly as hard.
Yeah.
But there were some moments where I'm like, I don't want anyone in this family to get hurt.
Yeah.
And so, that kind of mattered to me.
Right.
And there's tons of moments where other side characters maybe had something happen to them or had their own experiences, and it kind of showed.
Right.
They had their own, people dealt with their own tragedies, A, and B, got away from their own threats in probably some of the more horrific ways.
Oh yeah.
There's some families we saw were like, "Oh, we're totally safe. We're going to be fine." And then one of my family members comes out later like, "Yeah, that didn't happen."
Right.
It's pretty scary, It's very, very intimate while also being this big disaster film.
Right.
Which works.
And had this been a rated R gore fest back in the 70s, my parents still would have taken me to see it. But I think for today's generation, all these kids are so sheltered. This movie is pretty decent, I think, for young adults. From 12 on, I think can handle this movie.
Yeah, I think if you can handle a scarier monster movie that isn't super graphic, then this is perfect right up the alley of that.
Exactly. There's no gore. There is some blood, but not a lot. And there's not a lot of swearing, I think.
No,
just a little bit.
I didn't think there was a whole lot of profanity going on. Zero to none of any kind of nudity or anything like that.
Oh, yeah. No, none of that.
Which, in my opinion, that can ruin most movies.
Right. It all depends.
So I was very, very comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of chunks of violence that didn't have to do with zombies. It just had to do with people being scared and trying to survive the apocalypse once society collapses in the 10 seconds it takes for a horde to build.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So that kind of was one of those things that I thought worked in the movie's favor as well. So if you can handle some basic action, this movie will be great.
Oh yeah, definitely. Okay, folks, thanks for joining us today for our special 2021 13 Days of Hallowtober series. Remember, our theme this year is zombies. And Spency Don't Peace, thank you once again for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Now, you can send your feedback to thenisnow42@gmail.com. You can also join in the conversation at our Facebook Then Is Now podcast group. Then Is Now podcast is a proud member of the Dorkening Podcast Network, so please be sure to check out the other great shows there at thedorkening.com. You can also visit our website at havenpodcasts.com, where you'll find our sister show, The East Meets the West, in which we discuss Shaw Brothers films and spaghetti western movies. And that reminds me, Spence, you were on the first episode of East Meets the West. You got to come back and do another one with us sometime.
Yeah, the Shaw Brothers are not my favorite movie makers, and films and Western films are not my favorite either. But I'll come back for something.
Yeah, we'll pick some good ones. You don't know what you're missing out on. They're so good. And also, Then Is Now is on YouTube, so please visit youtube.com/user/UncleDeath1 to get the latest videos, as well as other fun videos. Please subscribe to our YouTube page and also share the video versions of our podcast with your friends and get them to subscribe as well. And don't forget to go wherever you download your podcast from and leave us a great review so more listeners can find us. You can find us on all the podcasting apps, especially the big three, iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. Class dismissed.
The This Now podcast is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. Sounds, music, and clips played during this podcast are the property of their copyright holders. All original content is copyright Jupiter Media.
For more shows like the one you just heard, check out the Dorkening Podcast Network at thedorkening.com.
In the blink of an eye, the streets are consumed by chaos. I almost said chouse.